All right. Hi, please take us away.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's super exciting to have you all with us at our event to launch our loss and damage response toolkit. This is a practical, our toolkit is a practical and user-friendly guide to help a range of loss and damage actors that need support and wish to provide support to enhance the global response to loss and damage caused by the impacts of climate change. So we have a housekeeping, so a few things to highlight. Next slide, Heidi. Yes, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, where you're based, and your organization. You can also add the things you'd like us to cover during this event. Ensure that you are muted when not speaking. I think this doesn't apply now. It's a webinar part. I'm not sure I'm new at this. If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand or just post in them in the chat. No abuse will be tolerated. We need to be so kind whenever we are speaking. Thank you so much for that. And no AI note takers will be admitted to the call. I think this also doesn't apply. It's the webinar. We use the webinar part. Next slide, Hedi. So kindly, I think if you can access, I'm not sure the chat you're accessing, if it's a Q&A only, feel free to post post there, like introducing yourself. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. It means a lot. So you are welcoming you to this event. It was organized by the Loss and Damage Corporation Santiago Network Project, and it was funded by our amazing partners, the Scottish Government. We have someone representing the Scottish Government who will have time to share with us a few words. Just briefly to share with you Santiago collaboration with Santiago Network Project. It was launched shortly after the Santiago Network was established at the COP25 in 2019, which took place in Madrid. And the mission was to make sure that we provide thought leadership, technical expertise, and strategic advice to different stakeholders, including the governments. We work closely with negotiators and other key stakeholders to advocate for and ensure Santiago Network for loss and damage becomes a trusted, responsive, and innovative partner for developing countries in responding to loss and damage from the climate change impacts. Our work includes developing different outcomes, outputs, publications. Here we shared a few of them. We developed very many since 2022. You can always access them on the collaboration, Loss and Damage Collaborations Santiago Network Project webpage. So we'll share you can access the link. We'll share the slides after this event. Next slide, Hedi. So amongst the outputs we prepare, we include the key messages for important meetings or Santiago Network, as well as the WIM, West International Mechanism ISCOM meetings. This source and damage response toolkit is the next step in enhancing accessibility of support. We'll have different speakers. We have Christopher from Vanuatu, and we also have Tetet, who is also a member of the Women and Gender constituency, and she represents the constituency in the advisory board of Santiago Network. Now I would like also welcome Erin, the founder of the Recent Damage Collaboration, who also speak just a few words, and then pass on to our very own Kate. So at the moment, I'd like to welcome you, Erin, say just a few words, and then
Yeah,
please
thank you so
welcome
much.
Kate.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. It's great to be here, and just wanted to thank folks for bearing with us. We had at the launch of our report on lessons learned from Scotland's leadership on loss and damage. We had an unwelcome guest, which ended up being quite traumatic in our launch event. So we've increased rather our security protocols on our Zoom, perhaps a little bit too much. So you'll see that we don't have a chat. We'll work on that for our next public-facing webinar, but we just wanted to ensure that everybody here is safe. That's our priority. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Keith Mackey, who is a senior policy advisor on international climate change with a focus on loss and damage at the Directorate for Energy and Climate Change with the Scottish Government. I just want to say a few words about Keith and his partner in crime in the Scottish Government, Katie Miller, who have been just tremendous partners. We have been fortunate to work with the Scottish Government since, or not formally, but we've been engaging, having conversations with the Scottish Government since shortly after COP26, when Scotland made a pledge of £1 million to the, at the time, yet to be established loss and damage finance facility. And that was, Scotland was the first government in the global north to do so. That really set the stage for Scotland's leadership. It also encouraged others. A group of philanthropies pledged 3 million USD, also at COP26 rather, for loss and damage. And since then, Scotland has pledged 10 million pounds. That funding has all been implemented through projects on the ground. And you can access, we'll share the report that we did last year. It's just tremendous, the impacts that 10 million pounds have had on the ground. So without further ado, before I do actually, I want to also recognize Scottish civil society, who really went above and beyond to encourage the Scottish Government to play a leadership role on loss and damage. And now I'm going to introduce Keith, who will say a few words on behalf of the Scottish Government. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thank you very much, Erin, for your kind words. And it's great to see so many people today on the call. So as Erin said, my name is Keith Mackey, and I'm the Loss and Damage Policy Advisor for the Scottish Government. So I've had the privilege of working alongside the Loss and Damage collaboration in one way or another for almost 3 years now. And I've seen just how impactful their work is and continues to be. So as Erin said, Scotland was proud to be the first global north government to commit funding explicitly to address loss and damage at COP26. And since then, we've mobilised £10 million on community-led loss and damage projects in East Africa, the Pacific Islands, the Bay of Bengal, and the Andean Highlands more recently. So we've always maintained that direct community access to funding is the best way to support people to address the impacts of loss and damage. Through delivering these programs, we're acutely aware of the importance of not only supporting communities directly to deal with the impacts of loss and damage, but also for the need to support capacity building. So that's why we felt it was so important to fund the loss and damage collaboration, produce this toolkit to build upon the great work they have already been doing. We know that access to funding is a significant barrier for many, and this toolkit will help to further simplify routes to support for communities available under the UNFCCC. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers and more about the toolkit, and I'll hand back to Erin maybe to introduce our next speaker. Thank you very much, Erin.
I'll hand it back to Hyacinthe, but I just want to recognize before I do, thank you so much, Keith. I want to recognize also the team that has led this work. Hyacinthe Niyitegeka and Heidi White, who co-coordinate our Santiago Network Working Group, as well as all the many people who contribute to Tet and Christopher amongst them. I see Linda Siegel on the call. We have many others that make this work happen. So we are definitely a collaboration, and we wouldn't exist without our members. Thank you so much. Over to you, Hyacinthe.
Yeah, thanks so much, Erin and Keith. Wonderful to hear from both of you. And I forgot to also acknowledge my colleague, Hedi, my wonderful co-lead of the project. And as Erin said, also we recognize everyone who contributes a lot to this work. We really appreciate your contributions. So this event is going to be moderated by both Hedi and myself, and we look forward to make it interactive, and we hope you're going to engage and you find it really useful. And our agenda, just highlighting what's on the agenda. Hedi, and now next slide. Okay, so we're done with welcoming you all, and we are going to have an overview of the toolkit. Then we'll have time to hear from Christopher about the Vanuatu case study and implementing technical assistance provided through Santiago Network. Then we have from TETET about non-state actors and community access to the technical assistance through Santiago Network. And then we'll have 5 minutes break. We have time for questions and answers. We have 5 minutes break. Then we'll have interactive exercises, discussions, and then we'll be closed. So you're all encouraged to engage as much as you can. I'll pass on to my colleague Hedi, take us through an overview of the toolkit. To you, Hedi.
Thanks, Jacinta, and thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to Keith, the Scottish Government, for supporting the work, and Erin, and all of you that have supported this work in some way or another. I'm just going to give you, I'm not going to tell you everything that's in the toolkit today. You'll have to read it. The idea of today's webinar is to give you a sense of what's inside and then get you thinking about how you can engage with the toolkit and what are the different pathways for you to engage, provide support, and generally support the landscape on loss and damage to be better and stronger, and make sure that support is getting to the ground. So this is the table of contents of the toolkit. So at the start of the toolkit, we first talk about the loss and damage landscape, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in the next slide. But the idea is that we tell you a little bit about the context, the broader context we're in, and then the toolkit just narrows its focus on the UNFCCC UN Climate Change Convention and its Paris Agreement, the bodies under those international agreements that are working on responding to loss and damage. So you have the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, you have the Warsaw International Mechanism Committee, Executive Committee under that, and we provide information on each of those bodies in terms of what they are, how much money they have, what are the options for support. So the Executive Committee, for example, we tell you about what are the different technical products and knowledge products and policy work that's happening there that you can pay attention to help you with implementation on the ground. With the Santiago Network, we also, again, what is the Santiago Network? And we talk about the support available. What are the activities that you can apply for support for if you're an expert? What support can you provide to those that are asking the Santiago Network for assistance? And we give very high level information about the processes, but of course we encourage you, there are much more detailed guidelines on the web pages for these different bodies, but hopefully this is a starting point to help you start to engage with what can sometimes be quite intimidating and overwhelming sets of documents and processes. So that's the broad brush overview of what's in the toolkit. And so now I'll turn to talk about the loss and damage support landscape that we're working within. So here you have, and we'll share these slides with all of the registered participants. So if you find the text a little bit small to read, it's just to give you an idea of what's there. And hopefully you can spend a little bit of time studying these when you read the toolkit itself. But as I already said, the toolkit provides an overview of the support options in the multilateral system for responding to loss and damage. So we're today focused on these purple ones in the diagram, but it's really important, and it's an important part of the thinking that the Loss and Damage Collaboration and other actors have, that those purple bodies aren't the entire solution. At the moment, they have funding levels less than 1% of the estimated needs. And so this complementary landscape is certainly needed to ensure that all of the needs, as much of the needs as can be met, are met. And so we have here, for example, other UNFCCC bodies and processes, such as the Green Climate Fund, such as the Adaptation Fund. You have the work under the technology mechanism of the convention. There's transparency framework, biannual transparency reports that countries have to prepare. And there's nationally determined contributions, which increasingly, and Christopher from Vanuatu is on the call, they've been leading some of that work, including loss and damage in the NDCs. And then outside of that UNFCCC landscape, and I know when I was looking through the registered participants for this session, a lot of you are represented in these green groups down the right-hand side. That's, you have UN specialized agency, and you have other UN entities and bodies. There's the International Organization for Migration, the UN Office for Human Rights, refugees, etc., that are all also closely related and linked to the work on loss and damage. And you also have individual experts, civil society, the vulnerable people and affected communities that Tatet will speak a little bit more to when she presents. So that's the context we're in, and what came out of some other work we did on the International Court of Justice advisory opinion was just that importance of effective international cooperation to deal with this very global issue. So that's what we start with in the toolkit. And then we start to get into the details. So who can benefit and what are the opportunities to engage? So in this slide, you'll see we've got the Santiago network as the connector, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage as the wallet, and the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee we call the brain. And between each of these bodies, they all cover distinct but interrelated issues and provide different options. So we have, for example, very basic, at the most basic level for the Santiago network, make a request for technical assistance. And that's some of what Christopher will speak to in his presentation in the Vanuatu context. And then in the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, you can make a funding request. Another really important focus of the Santiago network at the moment is to expand their membership of organized, you see this OB&E member, that's organizations, bodies, networks, and experts that apply to become members of the Santiago network, and then they're connected or matched with those who are seeking support for particular topics on loss and damage. And there's a few other things that we've also listed here. So what we'll see now, we'll hand over to Christopher and Tatet to talk about their experience in terms of engaging in these bodies in these different ways. And then we'll come back to do an exercise to unpack a little bit more the different options and pathways for support. So I think I can, Hyacinth, if it's okay with you, I may as well just hand straight over to Christopher now to do his presentation. And
Yes,
Christopher, okay, great. We already briefly introduced Christopher, but I'll say again just to thank Christopher for joining us today. Christopher's been part of the Santiago Network group under the Loss and Damage Collaboration since our very first paper, which was in the little images on the early slide that Hyacinth spoke to. So Christopher and Vanuatu have been well before that, since the 90s, pushing for loss and damage under the convention, and we're happy that you're here to support us with this launch. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi. I hope you can hear me okay. A very warm and tropical evening to all of you from Port Vila, Vanuatu. It really is a pleasure to be speaking at this event because the Loss and Damage Collaboration has been so helpful to Vanuatu over the years. I think we've been leading the way, but we absolutely could not have done it without some of the brains that are on this call and as part of the collaboration. So we're glad to continue supporting, and we're thrilled that this toolkit is so practical and useful. We wish that we had something like this as we were navigating the loss and damage architecture. So I'll just take you through a bit of a history of Vanuatu's experiences with loss and damage, and then really get into how we've engaged in the architecture. For those of you who don't know, Vanuatu is a small island developing country in the South Pacific. We have 350,000 people, but what really sets us apart is how intensely climate impacts are affecting our economy. Up to 60% of our GDP is lost every year because of just repeated cascading, compounding climate impacts, a whole range of impacts, but more so the non-economic losses and damages, the undermining of our fundamental human rights, the loss of culture and language and biodiversity. It is truly the single greatest threat that we face. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see here the whole range of impacts that we face, whether it's the extreme events, tropical cyclones or prolonged drought, to the slow onset occurring events like ocean acidification, which is decimating our coral reefs and chasing our communities away from the coastline because of sea level rise. The next slide will highlight again what a priority the government of Vanuatu has put on loss and damage. In fact, our parliament made an emergency climate declaration stating that this is, in fact, the single greatest threat to our development. There is no greater threat to Vanuatu's people than climate change. You mentioned the next slide, you mentioned that Vanuatu has been doing some avant-garde loss and damage work for a very long time. In fact, we made a submission to the UNFCCC negotiating committee before we even had the convention, suggesting and proposing that there should be a loss and damage fund, essentially, to compensate those islanders who'd lost lands due to sea level rise. Obviously, that didn't happen back in the 1990s, but here we are 31, 32 years later, where we now have the fund for responding to loss and damage. And I'm glad that we finally got to that place. It took too long, but we need to move forward. So if you go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about how Vanuatu domestically has dealt with the issue of loss and damage. We set up several years ago something called the National Advisory Board on Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction. And this was the government's first attempt to really bring two communities together, because we were recognizing that the climate folks talking about adaptation and mitigation weren't necessarily linked with the disaster people dealing with the impacts. And so this was legislated. The NAB is now our supreme policymaking body for climate change and disaster risk reduction. And they have, if you go to the next slide, a series of working groups covering a whole bunch of really important topics. One of them now is the loss and damage working group. And this working group pulls across ministries, it pulls private sector, civil society, academia, development partners. And it's this working group that sets the policy recommendations for the national government. So really, we're having our own people at all levels and of all different types setting our loss and damage policy. The next slide will give you an example of what this working group has been able to achieve. So last year, Vanuatu launched one of the first loss and damage policies anywhere in the world. And this came from months and months of discussion with our communities and our provincial governments and our different sectors and hierarchy of society about what was happening to them, what loss and damage means to them, and most importantly, what is it that they're already doing or could be doing should support, finance, capacity, et cetera, become available. And I've put the QR code on there. I would really encourage you to have a look at this policy, because we put so much effort into really defining what loss and damage is for the Republic of Vanuatu. While there is an understanding at the global level, this policy sets it in Vanuatu's terms. The next slide tells you a little bit about what's in that policy and why it's so important. There are 11 thematic areas, 85 different policy directives, but you'll see we've got thematic areas on the governance of how we manage loss and damage across sectors. We've got information on non-economic loss and damage, slow onset events. There's even information there on relocation and mobility, because we see that as a part of the loss and damage response, through to climate justice and human rights and meeting international obligations, the ICJ, right into finance and what that means for communities getting direct access. So there's a real a lot of information. Quite a bit has come from the thinking of the loss and damage collaboration. Next slide, I'll just shoot through these quickly. There's a definition that we've created for Vanuatu's understanding of loss and damage. And while the core of that definition are the adverse effects of climate change that are residual even after adaptation, there's a whole range of components that our people feel are relevant to the understanding of loss and damage. And so you've got the components here, but our definition is actually 3 pages long, and it really explains it from our perspective. The next slide tells you a little bit about our thinking of what constitute action to respond to loss and damage. And so we've created a typology of those types of actions, some of which may be also considered adaptation, but these are what the government of Vanuatu, the people of Vanuatu, feel are actual responses to loss and damage. You mentioned, Heidi, in the next slide that Vanuatu has put loss and damage in its NDC, and we felt this was a really important way to now begin to engage with the international loss and damage architecture, where loss and damage for a long time has been kind of a stepchild. But the NDC is the primary document where countries can define their priorities. And it's also the primary document where our partners, our funders come to say, what are your greatest needs? And so we have put a standalone loss and damage section in the NDC, and it's not a tiny section. It is as substantial as adaptation. More substantial than mitigation because our greenhouse gas footprint is so small. We have 52 loss and damage commitments and a total cost to implement this NDC up to $1.2 billion by 2030. Now, that is not all external funding. The government of Vanuatu is contributing significant amounts to funding these loss and damage needs. The next slide also shows you what's in our NDC about finance. So we've made it very clear that there is a unique loss and damage finance mechanism within the climate finance flows. And this is important so that our partners understand we don't need new systems, we don't need parallel or duplicative approaches. We have our own financial infrastructure for receiving loss and damage finance and then dispersing it all the way to the last mile communities, households, organizations. So that's in part of the NDC climate finance platform. Another way Vanuatu has engaged in the next slide here with the international architectures outside the UNFCCC, and you all would know what we've done at the International Court of Justice, the fact that advisory opinion, sorry, you can go to the next slide. The advisory opinion was released last year in July with an incredible legal analysis about essentially loss and damage, climate harm, and what states are obliged to do and what happens when those obligations are breached. And of course, we're going back to the United Nations General Assembly next month with a follow-up resolution to welcome the advisory opinion, but also operationalize it to make sure that loss and damage is being actioned. The next slide talks about how we've engaged at the Fund for Responding for Loss and Damage. So the Pacific Islands are working together very closely. In fact, we've got a shared board seat. So Fiji was our first board member from the Pacific for a year. Cook Islands is the current board member. And soon, this year, Vanuatu will take the board seat at the FRLD to make sure that these ideas that we have so laboriously created are actually brought into that architecture. Now, as you know, the next slide, the FRLD has made available this BIM, and you can read all about it in the toolkit. And Vanuatu wants to make sure that we're meeting this 50% allocation floor for SIDS and LDCs, that there are requests coming through to the FRLD that are meaningful for our communities. And so we reached out to the Santiago network, and this is the next slide. We got a lot of help actually from the loss and damage collaboration. This was before there was even a template on how to make a request. Vanuatu made a first request in 2023, asking for help to prepare for what we anticipated to be the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, help us pull together a request. And what we loved about the Santiago Network approach is it's not the government of Vanuatu that will do the work, but it's actually partners who will offer to help us get the assistance that we require. And in fact, we were so proud that it wasn't the big international partners that won this bid to help Vanuatu. It was our own local organizations that came together in a consortium and won the bid from the Santiago Network to provide the assistance to the government of Vanuatu. So the lead on this bid is a local private sector organization, and probably the most outstanding member of the consortium so far has been a community-based organization in a remote part of Vanuatu that's been spending the last 10 years doing loss and damage with communities. And they have really showed what the response should be and could be if we had these additional resources from the FRLD. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just give you a sneak peek about what Vanuatu is going to ask for from the FRLD. We have got 4 components. The first component is really about local planning. So our CBO, as part of the consortium, they said what we really need to do is bring loss and damage into these community plans, and then make sure that there is money directly accessible to communities, to households, to implement those plans. So the first 2 components include getting money through cash transfers and doing small grants and subsidizing microinsurance and a whole range of mechanisms for direct access. We're also doing some relocation work. And then the final component is about tracking and measuring and monitoring loss and damage to help decision makers do better than we're doing at the moment. So that's coming up. And then I guess I'll end this presentation with a couple of recommendations. First of all, make sure that the loss and damage work is done by a whole range of people. It will never work if it's one ministry or one group. The second recommendation is around our definition of loss and damage. Global definitions do not apply to local contexts. And so that bottom-up thinking about what loss and damage means and the local solutions for us was essential. That was the grounding for everything. We also, as I mentioned, put loss and damage everywhere. In our NAP is coming out very soon. It's going to be one of the first NAPs, I think, in the world that has a full integration with loss and damage, and in our sector policies. With the ICJ, the work that we're doing at the ICC on ecocide, I think it's time to step outside the UNFCCC and really bring loss and damage anywhere and everywhere that it can bring help for the people who are suffering harm. So engage in those legal pathways. I would encourage all on this call to use the Santiago network. It's a free resource that is immediately available with funds ready to go and an operating advisory board. And we were so lucky that we had the support to get that first Santiago network engagement. But everybody should be thinking about that. And it's not just countries. You could request it as an NGO or a private sector. And then suggesting also that the FRLD might not be the only source of funds. We heard that from Heidi, less than 1% is contained within these mechanisms. So we're looking outside at the entire landscape to think about how we're going to meet this just devastating, catastrophic need that we're facing at the moment. Final recommendation, use this toolkit. I've read through it. It's so practical, so useful. And like I said, I wish that Vanuatu had had something like this when we began engaging with the international architecture and with our loss and damage policy, but I'm so glad that it exists now. And please reach out. The next slide has my email. Please reach out to Vanuatu. We always want to share our experiences and make sure that we're moving together as a global community. Thanks so much, Heidi and Hyacinthe.
Thank you, Christopher. A wonderful and energetic and very informative presentation, as always. We can now hand over to Tet, who will give us the next, another angle, I guess, for how you can think about this toolkit. I was looking at some of the questions in the comments in the chat, and we had a question or a comment about how this toolkit might be used in, or their expectation that this toolkit was one thing, but maybe it's another thing. And to me, I think the toolkit has certainly it can be used for funding, but actually I hope it can be used in a range of different ways. So helping people get better in these bodies as a starting point, to understand what are the opportunities to engage in and influence policy making on loss and damage at the international level. And then how do you communicate, how do you coordinate among different areas of expertise from the international, we always talk about international, coming down regional, coming down to the local level, and then feeding that information back up. And I think Tet now will speak to some of those other sort of ways that we should be thinking about these bodies in terms of what is the role of non-state actors, why are community-driven requests important, how can communities, civil society, other non-state actors access loss and damage support? What are the opportunities? What about the other bodies? Tet is our Santiago Network Advisory Board Women and Gender representative, but she certainly has experience across the loss and damage spectrum and a range of other types of engagements. And then what are the barriers to access and challenges? What does the conversation on a minimum percentage of assistance for communities mean? Tet, I asked you all these questions, but please go ahead and let us know what you think about how best to engage in this space. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much, Heidi, and congratulations, first of all, for this toolkit. Now, it's really, really very meaty, substantive, and yet compact. There's so much information that is so accessible. So I'm really happy and I'm honored to be part of the Loss and Damage collaboration. And let me just take this opportunity to also express my appreciation for the support, of the L&DC, especially those policy briefs that you come out with are really, really helpful for our effective engagement as representatives to the advisory board of the Santiago Network. So as Heidi has already mentioned, I'm there sitting as the representative of the Women and Gender constituency, together with representatives from the youth constituency and the indigenous peoples organizations. Which brings me to the first question that has been put forward. So sorry, I don't have those dazzling slides that Christopher prepared. And after his presentation, I feel like, oh my gosh, it's really, really very uh informative, Vanuatu's experience in leadership in loss and damage response. But that's from the government side. So now we are talking about what is the role of non-state actors in loss and damage response and why are community requests important. So when I first thought about this question, I really struggled because when I think about non-state actors, what immediately comes to mind are communities, civil society, NGOs, diaspora, and faith-based groups. Well, I consulted Google. A quick Google search would say that non-state actors are individuals or organizations that influence political, economic, or social affairs without being affiliated with government. So that now expands who fits into this category. So non-state actors also include private sector, including transnational corporations and private military companies. So we all know that private sector, or let's be square about it, TNCs, mostly engage in profit-seeking extractive industries, pretty much the ones responsible for the climate crisis. They are increasingly being looked upon as solutions, and we can certainly debate on that. But for us who work for climate justice, it's very clear why communities, civil society, NGOs, etc., there's no debate that we play a very important role in loss and damage response. We are in the front lines. We feel the disproportionate impacts of every typhoon, cyclone, drought, sea level rise in our lives and in our communities. The impacts of a crisis that we have very little contribution to. And it goes without saying that because this is our painful lived reality, we must be involved in any and every response that governments and the international community takes on. We must have ownership in rising up and rebuilding because we're more than just victims. And the success of any initiative lies on the ownership that people in the community have. Simply put, nothing about us without us. And I'm really glad that Christopher highlighted that in the preparation of Vanuatu's TA proposal, communities spearheaded, communities were very much involved in this entire process. Which brings me to the next question. What are the opportunities through the Santiago Network? And is this the same for the other bodies? Okay. I know some of our colleagues from the Santiago Network Secretariat are in this call. So let me just put it out here. The Santiago Network is unique in this sense. The focus on communities particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change is intrinsic to the Santiago Network's core mandate. So we can also refer to the outcomes of the first global stocktake, recognizing the importance of particularly vulnerable developing countries and segments of the population in responding to loss and damage associated with climate change impacts. And it also identifies segments of these populations that are already vulnerable owing to different factors, geography, socioeconomic status, livelihood, gender, age, minority status, marginalization, displacement or disability, as well as the ecosystems that they depend on. So the Santiago Network, therefore, must operationalize an approach to technical assistance at the community level, as well as empowers communities vulnerable to the effects of climate change to take action to prevent and address loss and damage. So in a way, the Santiago Network serves as a bridge between affected communities and the global loss and damage ecosystem through the provision of knowledge, technical support, and importantly, access to finance. No? So the Santiago Network Secretariat has been mandated by the COP decision to elaborate procedures and modalities so that communities may access the technical assistance, no?
Thank you, Rose. Tete, you're mute. Okay, sorry. You're mute.
Now I'm unmuted. So in the advisory board meetings, we already have the guidelines for managing funding. And we are now at this phase, at this stage where we are having studies to determine the level of minimum percentage of technical assistance funded directly by the Santiago Network to be made available to communities. So let me get it straight, no? Unlike in the other constituted bodies, it is very clear in the Santiago Network that communities can have direct access. There's no negotiating that. And now the Secretariat and the Advisory Board are finding ways to try and make this happen. So we already had several informal meetings, etc., on how to determine this minimum percentage of technical assistance. But we have been very clear as a civil society that we do not want for this minimum percentage to be tokenistic. You know, like it's not just another box to be ticked off so that the Santiago Network can say that communities are accessing technical assistance support. So it's taking a careful study of how to arrive at exactly what is this minimum percentage for communities. And in terms of the barriers to access and challenges for the engagement of observers, while non-government stakeholders are eligible to make requests, we are not yet represented among the requests listed on the Santiago Network webpage. So nobody is stepping up yet, in terms of applying for TA support. So the parties at COP30 recognize this, and the WIM review outcome also encouraged communities to submit requests for technical assistance. And we have yet to get that. Now, what is probably hindering communities is they probably don't know how. It can be quite daunting how to submit a technical assistance request. But the Santiago Network also has another route, another way by which communities access can be enhanced. We do have a dedicated funding window of about $50,000 that would enable simplified procedures for communities. Now, communities may apply for amounts bigger than the 50,000, but then they would have to go through, this whole fiduciary protocol stuff. But if they want to skip through that, there is that dedicated funding window of up to $50,000 for communities. Yeah, so there's also a number of ways that communities can benefit, either by responding to a call for proposals or experts as OBNEs, directly requesting assistance, I already mentioned that, or preparing or supporting the preparation of a request by a government, as what the Vanuatu example has shown us, including as part of stakeholder consultations. So what does this conversation on minimum percentage mean? Ultimately, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to influence its determination, how to make it accessible, and how to make it have an impact on communities that are most affected by the climate crisis. All right, so I'll stop there and handing it over back to Heidi. Over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks to Tet and for another wonderful presentation. We thought it was really important to have Tet and Christopher both speak to give those two different sides of the coin in terms of the traditional party to the Convention and Paris Agreement accessing support through these institutions versus the perspective of the non-state actors, the communities, those that are impacted, and how they see and engage with this architecture. And I think it's important, in particular to Tet, one of the points you highlighted for me is that we don't yet have those communities and those non-government actors engaging. And I know that the advisory board of the Santiago Network is working on that, but hopefully, at least my personal hope through this toolkit is hopefully this can help people understand more the landscape and enhance that level of engagement going forward. So let's see. Thanks for all the work. Hyacinthe, shall I hand over to you now to take us through? We'll just do a Q&A for a little while, and then we'll see where we're at. We've got some interactive exercises in the next hour to get us thinking a little bit more about what is loss and damage, what are the impacts, and what are the pathways for support that the toolkit can help us with. So, Hyacinthe, over to you for now on the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you so much to our speakers, Christopher and Tetet. Your presentations were awesome. Thank you, Christopher, for highlighting how engaging local actors from the beginning has helped Vanuatu and making sure that the community is also engaged. It's great. Thank you, Tetet, for sharing about engaging communities in the work of Santiago Network. So I'm sure I saw some of the questions in the chat. Thanks a lot to Christophe and others for answering them. We are now going to hear from the participants. So whoever would like to come in by speaking, whether you have any questions for our speakers. We'd also hear from you if there's anything you'd like to know more about based on the presentation delivered. And they also would like to hear from you all if you've been engaging with the loss and damage bodies. That's the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee work, and the work of Santiago Network for Loss and Damage, as well as the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. I'd like to hear your experience, what barriers and challenges you faced, and the lessons learned, and everything that you'd like to share with us. So the questions on the screen, feel free to answer any of them. I see Alpha. Please come in. Feel free to raise your hand or post in the chat, please. Alpha, come in. I think you have.
Yes, I unmuted my mic. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to express my opinion after this very, very interesting presentation. It was really interesting. For the moment, I have a request concerning the first presentation on how to access funding on technical assistance. As you know, we are very new on this topic. We don't have a lot of experience. And for the next month or years, we will be beginning our first BTR, and we would like to communicate on the loss and damage. So for that reason, we will request a capacity building for our local experts in order to measure the impact and give a kind of estimation of loss and damage in our country and how to access the funding. because we are experiencing adverse effects of climate change due to the loss and damage. Thank you very much. Those are the two questions I would like you to clarify for me. Thank you for this very, very interesting webinar.
Thanks so much, Alpha. Hedy, it's okay with the first answer, our first question, and we take another one.
Yeah, that's fine. And then there's also, once we have our hands, there's also, I think, a few hanging questions in the chat we can also answer. So please, others, keep writing in the chat as well. So on your question, Alpha, I think I heard correctly, it was you were talking about starting the first biennial transparency report work, and that you wanted to include loss and damage, and that you also asked, you were also talking about getting expertise to help give an estimation and help with access to funding. So for that, there's a few ways, and we'll talk about this. Actually, I'll show you a diagram in the slide after the hour on the different support pathways. So one of the first things you could use the toolkit for is to look at what the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee is doing. So one of the pieces of work they're doing is developing guidelines on methodologies and other things in terms of the preparation of the biennial transparency reports, or BTRs. So that guideline should help you as a first step. Another thing that the executive committee is doing is, as an outcome of the WIM review at COP30 in November, parties requested the ExCom to work on finding the exact language, because it took parties a long time to come up with this language over the course of a year, as they tend to do. So there's a knowledge product, they call, or a policy brief, a technical paper on compiling existing methodologies and approaches for assessing economic and non-economic loss and damage, to inform approaches on loss and damage at the national level, and support in preparing technical assistance and funding requests. So I would follow those processes. Because those processes are still ongoing, of course, that support's not immediately available. So then you would look at the Santiago network and reach out to the Secretariat. We've got the guidance in the document on how to do that, and ask them to connect you to an expert. And you can be connected to an expert without any financial transaction occurring. You can just be the Santiago network Secretariat will look at their membership and see if there's someone who can help you with these particular areas. And if not, then they'll do a call for proposals and a more formal process to figure out how they can get you the support to do what you need to do. I think I'll stop there. But those are two ways that you can engage with two different loss and damage bodies on that. Thanks, Jacinta.
Thanks, Hedy. Alpha, is that helpful? Okay, I hope that's helpful. Feel free to post in the chat if you have a follow-up question. Juliet, I saw you raise your hand. Would like to come in on the questions we shared? Juliet, are you there? All right, I think I have Tasa, please come in.
Yeah, thank you so much for organizing this important webinar. I'm from the government of Zimbabwe, and we really want to tap into this loss and damage support. And I just want to get some hints or some advice on how best we can go about it, because we're thinking of maybe having a framework, loss and damage framework first. Then maybe it can guide us in applying and doing whatever. Because right now we have our L&DC 3.0 elaboration process. We only managed to submit a country statement in February last year, but now we are sort of elaborating it. And also we are working on our second biennial transparency report. So I just want some advice on how best we can try to we can try to get support on this loss and damage support actually. And also we have our own national adaptation plan that we have, and I'm sure we have tried to strengthen our policy and institutional frameworks, but we need to advise on how best we can go about it as a country, as Zimbabwe, as we are new in this area of loss and damage. Over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa. I think I'll put Christopher on spot to answer this. Christopher, would you like to come in, please? You're on mute. You're muted, Christopher. If you could unmute yourself.
I think he's struggling. We're all learning the webinar format, hey? Let's figure out how we can unmute Christopher.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for allowing me to unmute. Yeah, I was struggling to come off. Yeah, it's great that Zimbabwe is thinking about this. And I just can't state enough how important having a framework, a policy is as you engage. Just as an example, we've had numerous projects begin in Vanuatu on loss and damage, and typically a project or a project partner would come in and say, okay, what are your needs? And let's do a big analysis. Having this framework has just shortcut everything. The policy outlines all of the directives of government, what needs to be done, where, by whom, what it's going to cost. And so partners are just able to come in and pick from our policy space. And I think that's a great idea that you have to start there. You could use our policy as an example, just have a look at and see how we've structured it, the way that we've formulated those loss and damage policy directives, the way that we've costed the loss and damage actions and prioritize them. So that might be helpful. And particularly if you're interested in doing BTRs and things, Vanuatu also put loss and damage in its BTR. So you could look at kind of those existing case studies and how that might help. And if you wanted to have direct bilateral conversations, we're definitely open to that as well.
Thank you so much, Christopher. That's very helpful. I hope that that's also helpful to you. Feel free to share in the chat if you have a follow-up question. Now, Juliet, please to come in as well.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. You did not unmute me the first time.
Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you for the webinar. Really appreciate, and thanks L&DC for the good work that it always does on loss and damage. For me, it's just there was a comment on what are others facing or challenges with the loss and damage. I think I would like to emphasize on more capacity building, more awareness, between the difference between adaptation and loss and damage. I've realized that working in this field of loss and damage, people are confusing the two. And this is bringing a challenge in terms of accessing funds. Others are more or less like, oh, you already have funds for adaptation. What do you need money for loss and damage? So I think there's need for the two to be differentiated so that we can work properly. The way it was able to differentiate between adaptation and what's the other? Is it the one that before adaptation? What do you call it? Sorry, reducing carbon, etc. At least that now people are able to understand the difference between the two. But now we need for people to be able to understand and see which activities are for adaptation, why is loss and damage coming in. That's what I wanted to highlight, so that when we're doing these studies, when we're doing these webinars for information sharing, people should be able to understand the difference between the two, not just us people in the but also those that are able to look at policies and make decisions, putting those policies in place. They should also be able to understand of what they're working with, so that we push this LD forward as Africa and the Global South. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Juliet. Yeah, I agree with you on making sure that the adaptation and loss and damage are differentiated. Like we understand like the difference and how they are interconnected. I think that's the work the collaboration is looking forward to take forward to. I don't know if Erin, if you're sorry to put you on the spot, would like to speak about that briefly.
Sorry, I'm on chat patrol, so like I'm on unmute patrol. So can you restate the question, please, Hyacinthe?
No, Juliet was mentioned that there's a need of differentiating adaptation and loss and damage, and I was adding that they also have to make sure that we understand how they are interconnected. I mentioned that this the work the collaboration is planning to take forward very soon. I'd like you to speak about it if you
Yeah, happy to do that. So thank you so much for raising that. This is a critical issue, Juliet. Communities should absolutely not be burdened with distinguishing between adaptation and loss and damage, and they will ultimately need to address the full spectrum of climate action, from adaptation to loss and damage, what that means. This is one of the big lessons coming out of the work that was funded by the Scottish Government, including from the work that the Climate Justice Resilience Fund supported, and something that we're taking forward in our work. So my colleague Malik, who's with us, is leading a work stream on adaptation and loss and damage. The idea is to look at, what does the nexus look like? What does it look like when you reach the limits of adaptation? And how can you support adaptation and loss and damage simultaneously? So thank you so much, Julia. If Malik wants to add to what I've said, please do come in. But we'd really love for all of you to engage in this new work stream. That's really important. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erin. And thank you, Jared, for raising that. So we look forward to also seeing how this will work out. I see Emily, please come in.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to find out from the earlier discussion, the presentation mentioned that they had integrated loss and damage in their national adaptation planning. So I just wanted to find out from them their experience in terms of saying, has the process been impactful towards unlocking climate finance, specifically from various multilateral funding windows, and also noting maybe the complexities of defining loss and damage, since it is usually maybe context specific to say, whilst globally we can identify loss and damage in a certain norm, but it then is maybe further classified according to a country's context. So I just wanted to find out along those lines in terms of the actual impact of unlocking climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Emily. Again, Christopher, I'll put you on the spot on this. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thanks for the question. Maybe to start with the NAP, the National Adaptation Plan. So this is current work that's underway. Vanuatu hasn't released a NAP ever. And so this first NAP that we're going to release very soon has fully integrated loss and damage. And how have we done it? So as not to overlap, for example, with loss and damage policy. The NAP focuses its loss and damage efforts on limits to adaptation. So what we've done is we've really described in great detail how far adaptation can go and what hard and soft limits it reaches. And the real meat of our loss and damage integration comes in the adaptation tables. So for every sector, there's a list of priority adaptation actions. And for each one of those actions, we've considered comprehensively what the limits might look like, and then how that reaching that limit could then translate into another type of response, either an adaptation action used elsewhere that could then respond to that limit, or something completely different. So that's really how we've done it there. Now, in terms of unlocking finance, I think being able to articulate loss and damage across a spectrum of risk has been really important for Vanuatu. So our kind of loss and damage finance consideration is definitely not only the FRLD or the Santiago network. We're looking at the debt instruments that are available to Vanuatu. We're looking at insurance and payouts as a potential source of finance. We're looking at levies. In fact, we've got an airline loss and damage levy meeting happening next week. We're going to be talking about local mobilization of loss and damage finance from our own passengers and our own premium flyers. So I think we're being very broad with how we can source the finance that's required, because it is so expensive. The GCF, the Adaptation Fund, I don't know if people on this call are aware, but the Adaptation Fund has a pot of money which is dedicated to innovation. And we've had conversations with them about, could we use that adaptation innovation pot for exploring further the limits to adaptation, loss and damage. So there's really a whole range of ways, if you're thinking broadly, about how to mobilize that kind of loss and damage finance. And our policy does that. Our policy articulates the ways to think about loss and damage finance from different sources.
Thanks so much, Christopher. Emily, I hope that's helpful. So, yeah, I see more questions in the chat. Please feel free to keep posting them, or we will answer maybe during this this event, or after that. We will make sure that every question is answered. So, thank you so much, everyone who has engaged so far. We are going to have a 2-minute break to transition to another phase. Don't leave, just stretch and drink water. So we're going to, only 2 minutes. We'll be back in, okay, in 2 minutes. Thanks so much. Okay, I hope you're all back. Welcome back. Let's move to another slide. Okay, I'd like us to remind ourselves on what loss and damage is, how it happens, and how it affects people. So, loss and damage is caused by extreme events or slow and sunset events. Examples of extreme events include droughts, storms, among many others. You see, like on the screen, we have many examples. The list is not exhaustive. That we have many others we haven't listed. It can also be caused by slow onset events, including sea level rise, biodiversity loss, among many others. And then once it happens, it can be in two forms. It can be economic and non-economic. For economic, it's a loss and damage that can be quantifiable, while non-economic, a loss and damage cannot be quantified in terms of money. So here are the different examples of both economic and economic loss and damage. But there's what we know is that both types lead to the impact to human impact. They can they can cause different issues to human being. Next slide, Nadim. So what we have also included in a toolkit is how three bodies, the WIM-EXCOM, the Executive Committee of West International Mechanism, the Santiago Network for Loss and Damage, as well as the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, how they engage in the responding to the loss and damage before the crisis, post-crisis, and the recovery phase. So you can always see this once we will share the link to the toolkit. You can see details of how the three custodial bodies will play the role in making sure that they're responding to loss and damage. So I will hand over to Hedi to take us through other scenarios. Then we'll have time to have a discussion, to you, Hedi.
Thanks, Hyacinth. And yeah, I realized this. I was talking with Hyacinth about how this beautiful example scenario and workflow that Tarek from the Loss and Damage Collaboration did for us is something that you really want to zoom in on and study and think about. So you can just appreciate the pretty colors and the flow for now, I imagine, with how it's coming up on your screen. But this is kind of what inspired this next exercise that Hyacinth and I thought was useful to do with you all, which is to do some scenario thinking. And we already started doing this in the Q&A, and wow, there are some really great questions in the chat, and I feel like the toolkit really very much only scratches the surface in terms of support options, but hopefully it's a starting point and we can do more of this type of work to make the toolkit deeper. And there's many amazing resources that have been shared in the chat. So please, everyone look at the chat and see what everyone's sharing. It's wonderful. So the first exercise is just an example. So to show you how it is that we'll do the second part of the session. So for this scenario, we have a slow onset event, sea level rise, and then you'll see underneath the sea level rise icon at the top, there's economic loss and damage, and we have income, physical assets. So impacts on agricultural production, for example, there might be an impact on livelihoods from some sea level rise. There might be impacts to the tourism sector, damage to property, to homes. There's non-economic impacts of sea level rise, and that might be impacts to human health, human mobility, relocating communities. Christopher already spoke of some of this in his presentation. And then also issues of cultural identity, cultural heritage as well from sea level rise. It's obvious, it's very, as I think the community of people in this call would well know, that it's very context specific. So there are so many different ways that you could match up the different types of impacts from a sea level rise in one country, and depending on the other types of loss and damage impacts. And so here we've just got some examples for support for response in one type of scenario. So for the WIM Executive Committee, you can go and look at the technical guides they have on sea level rise and on accessing finance to address the impacts of displacement associated with the adverse effects of climate change. If you were looking at the Santiago network for support, you can make a request for technical assistance, remembering we have the government request pathway, but also TET's call to see how we can get more community involvement in this process. So there's the request for assistance to strengthen institutional capacities, assess needs and priorities, integrate sea level rise scenarios into existing policies or create new policies, prepare funding requests in consultation with different communities and those impacted. And then for the fund, you could have a request, a larger scale request for finance, and you'll see in the toolkit we have more information about how much money. So at the moment, the fund accepts requests for between 5 and 20 million US dollars. So that would be a larger scale request for finance to relocate severely impacted communities and support livelihood opportunities for relocated populations. So that's one scenario of how you could look at the toolkit, see what the support options are, and engage. And then the next example is a little bit less detailed, because I want to know from you all what you think would be needed here. So this is an extreme weather event example. And so that would be a tropical storm, a cyclone. There would be the range of different economic and non-economic impacts. And then in terms of the support for response, the questions to ask: what type of support is needed, which loss and damage body could help, what would be the first step, and what would be the intermediate to long-term steps. So over to you to see if anyone's brave enough to come in and make a suggestion on this. Of course, our panelists, you're welcome to come in and help us here with this first scenario. So if there's a tropical storm, what do you do? Does anyone have an experience in their country of responding to this kind of event? Whether that's in terms of planning or preparation, or whether that's in terms of support to respond quickly. That's certainly one of the gaps, I think, in the loss and damage bodies at the moment, that more rapid response that's in the works, I think, in each of the bodies. It's still a little bit of a delay to get that support in these kinds of rapid response scenarios. So I'm not seeing any brave people. I'll let you pause and think about it for a second. Okay, I can help on this. So for this kind of example, I'm looking now and seeing if there's any comments or experiences. Blowing of the whistle for help in the chat. Seeing if there's any other reactions. No? Okay. So I think as I was saying before, I think one of the things I wanted to point out here, I was just mentioning, is that one of the limitations of the loss and damage bodies at the moment is this rapid response in the event of an extreme weather event. at the moment, those kinds of modalities are still being worked out, and there's a need to have discussion as well with how that interacts with the work of the humanitarian community in terms of those quick responses and how the loss and damage response would be different or distinct or a value addition. But in any case, what you can do is you can look again, as we said before, you can look to the work of the WIM Executive Committee, and I'm just going to go back because I think this oh, going in the wrong direction. I think this scenario workflow is quite useful to study. We're trying to think about impacts that you're experiencing and the types of options available. So in this example scenario, it's talking about, for example, in the pre-crisis phase, the Santiago network might help build local capacity to respond to loss and damage. So if you're in an area where it's been identified that you're having, and Christopher and Ted are actually both in places where these kinds of extreme weather events are increasing in frequency and intensity in the Philippines and in Vanuatu. I know this is an escalating concern for them. And so you'll need you can utilize the Santiago network to build expertise and get ready for these escalating impacts. And then the fund for responding to loss and damage can also help when the time comes to get the money ready so that when the impacts happen, it can be dispersed quickly. There might be later down the line in the post-crisis phase, there might be support from the WIM Executive Committee on best practices for response. So how do you rehabilitate an area after it's been impacted? How do you deal with the cultural heritage loss? And how do you use the Santiago network to connect with the right expertise to deal with that? And then the executive committee in the recovery phase are working on support to develop guidance around response plans. So what does a response plan look like? What's already out there? I know there's a lot out there already, and I saw Animesh from UNDRR on our call earlier. He's dropped off now, but the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Network has done a lot of work on this kind of area in their work and thinking about how the Santiago network can add value in this space. So that's one example of how you could engage in the bodies where there's a tropical storm. And then here, and I think see early warning systems is also in the chat, and we've also got a suggestion from Linda about looking outside the UNFCCC, which thanks Linda for bringing us back to that. That was part of the first part of the toolkit where we talk about that broader landscape. So what are the options outside? And Linda's talking about, for example, the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, which provides payouts to policyholders based on the level of intensity of an event, including hurricane, extreme rainfall, and others. There's also the Africa Risk Capacity, and then the FCRAFI in the Pacific. Lots of acronyms, and so the engagement in these bodies can connect you to these kinds of resources. And the toolkit is meant to be a catalyst in that way. Okay, maybe there's not the support in the loss and damage bodies right now for that kind of response, but they certainly link you with those solutions. So that's the tropical storms. Thank you for the comments. And then, yeah, this was just a broad brush. We had some questions earlier in the discussion about the biennial transparency report around frameworks, around NAPs. So I wonder if anyone has any example that they want to bring to the group now that we could think about in terms of impacts that are happening in your countries, what kind of support you get, either asking us what type of support you need and what bodies, or if anyone has, experiences they would like to share that others can benefit from on accessing support for particular loss and damage impacts. If you have expertise on how to respond to any of these impacts that you'd like to share, and what are the steps, I'll pause there and see if we have any takers, any brave people on this slide. And I can see a comment about whether tropical rains, whether we'd also include flash floods in the scope of that, with the former, the tropical rains being expected more so than the flash flooding in certain LDC countries. That I don't have a clear answer to that. I think for this exercise, it's very much non-exhaustive, and we haven't covered the range of scenarios. But it's interesting to know that that's the experience that you have, and whether others have the same experience or different. Certainly, I think Christopher mentioned this before in his presentation about, and I'm sure there's other people on this call that could speak to this better than I could, about the interaction between all these impacts and the cascading impacts. So you don't always have a nice, neat example of just one loss and damage impact that you get to deal with. It's usually a whole range of different loss and damage impacts that are being experienced at the same or in sequence times, and it's really challenging to understand how to prioritize and get the greatest impact out of the smallest amount of resources. So that's hopefully something that these bodies can also help with unpacking. I'll just mute while we see if I mean, this was a test run to see if we could get your engagement in these kinds of exercises. So we can also go back to Q&A if that's useful for people. The idea really is just to show you how you can actively engage in thinking about using the toolkit and engaging more broadly in the loss and damage support landscape. Isn't there? I think we can probably move to the final part of the session, which is just, we had a range of questions that we thought we'd pose to you to see if you had any other thoughts to share. Again, there seems to be still quite active and interesting engagement in the chat. So, hi, Cynthia, maybe do you want to take us through the question and answer or the discussion here? And I'll have a little look at the chat and see if there's anything else I can answer in there.
Yeah, thanks so much, Heidi, and thank you everyone for your engagement. Now we have listed a few questions just to understand how you're engaging with the loss and damage constituted bodies you highlighted, and I'd like to hear from you what are the key lessons you've learned and the barriers you're facing in accessing the support to loss and damage. If you have any idea of how this could be addressed. Also, we know loss and damage space can be somehow complex. So I'd like to hear from you if you have anything to share about that, or following discussions. So the floor is open. Feel free to raise your hand. We'll unmute you, and then you can share with us. We would really like to hear from you. That's why we organized this event. I'd like to make sure that we hear from you. Yes, and feel free to also post in the Q&A chat. We'll respond if there's any question. All right, the floor is open. Thank you.
Hi, Cynthia. I can come in and answer one of the questions I was just looking at while we wait and see if any hands go up. I think
Yes,
one of
yes.
I was just looking at the questions again. So I think this is sort of a barrier question. This is Sneha that has posed, and also kind of a lesson and informing and strengthening the architecture. So I think this touches on a few things. And Sneha's comment was that she wanted to understand how non-economic loss and damage has been incorporated in the toolkit. Um, she says economic loss and damage can be quantified relatively straightforwardly, but non-economic loss and damage is much more complex due to its intangible nature. So how can non-economic loss and damage be effectively framed, particularly in a way that allows for its recognition and including in funding proposals? How can we justify and request financial support from the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage? Now, the first thing that I started to type was we really wanted to include in the toolkit a section on all of these different complex considerations that you need to take into account when making a proposal for support or engaging in the loss and damage space. Unfortunately, there just wasn't enough capacity to do that kind of section, so it was pulled out. And I hope that because this is an evolving landscape, this toolkit is really just a snapshot in time. And I personally hope that we can do another toolkit which deals with these more nuanced issues that have been raised, first in this comment by you, Sneha, and also by others. And so I was going to go on, but Sneha, I see you raise your hand, so maybe you want to come in and add before then I come to try and answer. Please come in. And also, if you have answers, you can also go ahead.
Hi everyone, thank you for addressing my comment. So in Nepal, in Melamchi, we did research on non-economic loss and damage, and we focused on psychosocial and cultural impact. But in our case as well, we had this sort of problem on how to quantify non-economic loss and damage. For example, we have the evidences that these types of problems such as cultural and psychosocial impacts occur in a small municipality in Nepal. But how do we claim that type of amount, or how do we quantify the non-economic loss and damage amount in the FRLD process? So if there are any ways in the toolkit that can help us understand or help us know regarding these things, then I think it would be much more type of sharing and learning in the process.
Thanks, Sneha,
Yeah.
for clarifying the question. And I was thinking one of the things with both the Loss and Damage Fund and the Santiago Network is they have they're quite broad insofar as the eligible activities. So, the Loss and Damage Fund, here it is, for example, has, all funding requests will be screened against the following eligible activities. And one of that starts with activities responding to economic and non-economic loss and damage associated with the adverse effects of climate change. And then there's a list there in the toolkit of a little bit more detail about what that looks like. But it doesn't actually really break down in that first part how you can really address that criteria. It's very much up to the person making the proposal to say, you know, this is an example of non-economic loss and damage, and this therefore fits the eligible activities criteria, and you know, you pass that stage, I guess, of the request. So that's, I guess, the first part that the Loss and Damage Fund Secretariat does. It screens and says tick yes, non-economic loss and damage. And then the next part is they do a technical review against funding criteria, and some other review processes. Now, the Loss and Damage Fund Board is actually still in consultation about the assessment methodology for the requests. And so there's still some details. Actually, I kept the toolkit quite high level because of that the board is still working leading up to its meeting in April on some of the details of how some of this assessment will be done. They are trying to get experts such as on issues like non-economic loss and damage to help with the assessment of requests. But there isn't really, honestly, there isn't really any great detail right now in terms of how you can do that work. What I would suggest is, and I see Heather responding in the chat about concerns about non-economic loss and damage, and like I said, it's sort of sad I didn't get to include all of this guidance in the toolkit, but I hope that there's resources through the non-economic loss and damage expert group in the XCOM where we've listed some resources that have been done and that are pending, that I hope will provide useful guidance. You can reach out also to the Santiago Network Secretariat to get some clearer guidance on this. They're supposed to be, they are mandated and required to coordinate with the Loss and Damage Fund. So I hope there can be some coordination across these bodies to help with these particular issues, which have been identified as challenges and gaps. So I guess that's not there's not necessarily a clear answer to how you do that in the Loss and Damage Fund now and guidance from that body, but there's guidance from the XCOM. There's an option for you to seek out support from the Santiago Network Secretariat and engage with other experts. I can see Erin's now typing an answer to Heather as well. So I guess that's an ongoing barrier in accessing support for that kind of loss and damage impact. And that's a useful area that we can hopefully elaborate in future pieces of work. So thank you, Sneha, for the question and the comments as well. Did anyone else want to come in on this topic or on another topic? Sneha, you're welcome to come back, or otherwise, Christopher, please go ahead. Yes, I'll ask you to unmute. Did that work?
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much. No, I just wanted to say that we've faced a real challenge when it comes to trying to quantify the impact, the non-economic impact. And so we've really shifted focus over the last, I would say, year to an effort to quantify the response to a non-economic impact. So rather than trying to understand how much value something which is invaluable has been lost, what are the things that need to be done and how much do those things cost? What do the responses cost? And we found that has been a much more tangible approach, particularly with communities. So they've lost a taboo site, which is worth cajillions of Vatu to them. But what now needs to be done to respond to the loss of this traditional site, which is now underwater because of sea level rise? It's very easy to identify the things that can and should and must and are owed to them because of the loss of the site, and then we can cost those things. So just a thought, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of our loss and damage journey trying to quantify those impacts. But even compensation, which Vanuatu is very interested in, is going to go to do something to respond, not necessarily to give back the entire value of what was lost. So just maybe a thought, a practical thought.
Thank you, Christopher. And Sneha, did you want to come back? I've just clicked ask to unmute in case you were trying to and you couldn't.
Yeah, thank you,
There you are.
Christopher. I think about the response thing as well in Nepal also. I think that was what we got in our research. For example, in terms of psychosocial impact, we saw that there were impacts in psychosocial, but instead of quantifying the psychosocial impact, we found that if we focus on the livelihood options of the communities, then the psychosocial impact, the type of anxiety, the depression, their work priorities, and also the type of status they used to have before their disaster, and the amount of money they used to have, so that those things will be a little bit compensated by the livelihood diversification and options and income opportunities. So I think that is a sort of response as well. So I think that part we need to understand rather than focusing on the quantification of non-economic loss and damages, because in some of the cases there are intangible losses. I think we should not also try to measure those intangible losses. For example, emotions and expressions, those experiences, those sort of things. And another thing in Nepal, what we are from PRC, what we are trying to do is we are trying to sort of identify the different type of typologies of non-economic loss and damage that is relevant to Nepal. I know there is certain typologies of UNFCCC's non-economic loss and damage, but we are trying to see if those matches with Nepal's typologies of NELD matches with the UNFCCC, and if there are something different that we could bring into the global platform of UNFCCC discussion on NELD, I think it would be great opportunities for everyone to learn from this kind of network. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sneha. I hope, if not already, you're engaged in the experts in the WIM Executive Committee and joining the Santiago network to share this expertise and insight. And thanks, Christopher, for the response and the guidance in the chat. Kosovi, can I hand over to you now?
Yeah, thanks so much. I just want to thank and echo the response from Christopher, because there is no absolute way to give cost to something which has no cost and which cross several generations and cultures. I think, in my view, because we do not have any mathematical way to put the cost on this, or any unique mechanism on the market to value this loss, I think we can opt for restoration, which in my sense is the practical way to reinitialize, if I may say, part of the history of people, part of their values, because we can't cover it completely. I do not, and I'm sorry to say that, vote for compensation because this thing has no cost. For me, it's extremely important to keep the narrative for next generation, even if the emotional cost cannot be covered. So for me, I would like to approach the issue of non-economic loss and damage with the possibility of restoration where possible, and if not, then associate culture experts to see how these aspects of the problem can be sorted out. And the reason why most of people, including myself, are very shy when it comes to non-economic loss and damage, simply because there is no absolute solution. And every solutions, if you go to the literature, most of the solutions are very relative and subjective, so you can't rely on them. There is no way you make a standard solution. I think that's the most difficult aspect. So I 90%, no, 80% actually agree with Christopher's solution, except the compensation, which in my view will come with some inequity issue, or some lack of transparency, and it will cascade to other types of problems. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Kosovi, for sharing your reflections on this as well. It's useful to have these kinds of discussions. The toolkit, it can hopefully be a spin-off for all range of different discussion on the gaps and the challenges. Hyacinthia, did you want to come in on anything or comment on anything?
And no, Hedi. Thanks everyone for engaging in the discussion. Everything was super helpful. Thanks.
Okay, I'm looking in the chat to see if there's any other questions, but otherwise I think we can move to close the session and thank you all. If there's any last comments or questions or anything that anybody wants to raise, everything is useful as we continue to develop this work and think about how the loss and damage collaboration can better support ensuring that the international work reaches the people who need the support and the people who can provide the support. All reflections are really useful for us, and I'll just I'm just scrolling through to see. I mean, there was some great questions everywhere, and thanks to also those who have been actively answering in the chat. I think we've got a hand from Imali. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is Janet. Janet Ahado from Kenya. I work with subnational government in the ASAL and semi-arid lands of Kenya. I wanted to share maybe an experience. Currently, we did an assessment and even published a paper on loss and damages. And this one, we are looking at raising water lakes and how it's affecting the communities. And as we are doing the assessment, little data is available, especially to quantify the losses. Most of the assessment only looked at, the impact in form of like mentioning, like if you talk of, if it's drought, the number of livestock that people have lost, the psychological, trauma and all that. But most of the assessment have not looked into the quantifying the losses and the damages. And the experience that we had is that we cannot be able to quantify an economical losses, like, the stress that people go through, the the stress people go through, the aspect of especially the cultural sites that has been, submerged. For instance, you cannot quantify into money. The indigenous knowledge, because there are specific places the community has been using over years for ceremonial activities. So as we are doing this, there is need to guide how best can we kind of quantify some of those losses. And at the same time, the experience that we have, because we are looking at different climate risk, most of experience, especially in arid and semi-arid lands of Kenya, communities experience multiple climate risks at the same time. Like, we have recurring drought, and wherever it rains, it comes with a lot of flooding, creating a lot of losses. And in the process, the opportunistic diseases like the zoonotic diseases come in to affect both the livestock and the human health. So this need to see, as we are focusing on one climate risk, another one overlap, and how best can we look at kind of a multi kind of hazard or multi kind of risk, and be able to kind of, because you cannot justify which losses can come from, which one is from the drought, which one is from the, let's say, flood, and which one is from the diseases, because one climate risk after another one, and then increasing the risk and the losses and the damages our community experiencing. So I wanted to share that as we are trying to come up with the assessment, ways that we can do, how best we can see different risks and how it's affecting different communities, and which is linking them to different losses and damages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janet, for sharing that information and reflections and information about the work that you're doing in Kenya. I think there's a lot to unpack there for everyone to reflect on in terms of better responses and better tools and better resources to deal with those really complex impacts. That again, I think I was thinking the toolkit is long, but it really only provides a starting point for starting to engage on these topics that you're all sharing. I think the complexity of the issues that everyone's facing just shows how much more work is needed to try and provide pathways for support to deal with these issues in the most effective way, and making sure the support is there within developing countries and for the governments and for the communities and for everyone, with the climate justice as the end goal always. And I think given the time, we have to stop, and I might hand to Hyacinthi to close us out. But thank you from me to all of you for your questions and your comments and your participation. There's a lot for us to think about in terms of more work like this, but also work across the loss and damage collaboration more broadly. So I'll hand it over to you, Hyacinthi.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks so much, Hedy, for the session. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Want to check with you, Kwasivi. Is that a new hand? Would like to come in on anything before we cross? Okay, I guess
No,
another.
it's not. It's not. I'm sorry about this. It's not.
Okay, yeah, no worries. So thank you, so I will thank everyone for joining. Thanks a lot to the Scottish Government once again for supporting this work. And as Hedy and Erin and others said, this is going to be an ongoing work. We wish, Erin has already shared the link in the chat. The toolkit is now available online. You can access it. Feel free to provide feedback. You can also reach out to us at our info email address. You can find it on our website, or someone will share it in the chat, and we'll keep updating it as based on the feedback. So we thank you a lot. Looking forward to future other sessions in the future. Wishing you a lovely rest of the day. Bye.
Do you want to invite Keith to say any final remarks?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, Keith. Please do come in. Say a few words. Yes, please. Yeah, and meeting us. Okay. Yes.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Hyacinthi. It's been a brilliant session. Thank you for all the feedback, and yeah, it's been a really good launch. Quite interested about the non-economic loss and damage, and we'll certainly discuss this going forward. Yeah, just a big thanks to everyone for coming along. It's been really good and great to see it so well received. Thank you very much.
If I could just say a couple more things just in response to, just thank you so much, Keith. If you could pass along our gratitude to the rest of Katie and the rest of the team. And we're just really grateful to all the support and the leadership of the Scottish Government on loss and damage. And we look forward to continuing to work with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.